Given it was one of the country's worst ever peacetime disasters, it's far from surprising that the fire at Grenfell Tower in West London in June 2017 that killed 72 people dominates the news agenda. However, this is too grave a moment in our history to allow fake news to take over and see the tragedy hijacked for a wide range of unfounded accusations. Until a few days ago, race campaigner Baroness Lawrence, mother of teenager Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered by a racist gang in 1993, had claimed firefighters would have acted more boldly had most of the inhabitants been white. Untrue and damaging insults for which she has finally apologised. Local MP, Labour's Emma Dent-Coad, has said the local council involved is guilty of, quotes, either racism or snobbery, take your pick, close quotes. Do the London Fire Brigade and Kensington and Chelsea Council have serious questions to answer about command structure, key decisions on the night, and decisions on and inspection of refurbishments? Damned right they do. But for once, can we not rush to ill-informed judgment, as so many lives depend on it?
Nick, you mentioned the local MP for the area that Grenfell Tower is in, Emma Dent-Coad, and I think it's important to say that she made those comments based on comments she says she heard councillors make. So it wasn't something that she just decided. She is the local MP and she felt that there were attitudes she'd witnessed that pointed towards racism or snobbery. But Kensington and Chelsea have replied to that, and they say if these claims can be substantiated, we will of course investigate them urgently. But I hope Emma would have reported them at the time as both a local councillor and MP. It's good to see that they're taking those allegations seriously, and I'm a little bit baffled really as to why in a week when we've had some really serious findings from the inquiry into Grenfell Tower, you've chosen the one remark that was made by Baroness Lawrence, which she quickly retracted and apologised for. And she had said that the individual firefighters were motivated by racism. She's now apologised for that. But that's not really the bigger issue here. The bigger issue is what were the institutional factors that allowed 72 people to die under those circumstances? And the findings we've had so far, which are only into... This is only phase one of the inquiry. It hasn't looked at the bigger context.
Which is to come. Can I ask
has said that the fire brigade acted wrongly.
Just lastly, before I throw it up, do you see any racial aspect to the Grenfell disaster at all?
I think it's impossible to look at something like this without taking race and class together. And I see a picture where people were put in a building without due regard for their well-being, and there's got to be some kind of indifference. You know, there was a mother of 5 from Afghanistan, 65, partially sighted, who can't walk unaccompanied, placed on, I think it was the 18th floor of Grenfell Tower.
Colour?
We don't know. And do you know what, Nick? The lawyers for the victims have had to fight for institutional racism to even be included in the terms of reference. So I'm saying, let's do the work. Let's find out what happened. I'm not jumping to conclusions, but it's impossible to ignore that these were people who were poor and some of them were not British. And these are not people who have had the same privileges in society as others.
Let's open it up.
I just want to put something... First of all, the Baroness Lawrence went to meet the Fire Brigade Union, represent the fire, and they'd issued a statement, actually, which says that we absolutely refute the claims made by Baroness Doreen Lawrence that there was any aspect of racism in our response to the Grenfell Tower fire or any other incident. Every single one of the firefighters and officers who responded to the fire that night were fully committed to rescuing as many people as possible and put their own lives at risk to do so. I completely believe that. I don't think there can be any argument about it. However, I think there's an interesting point here. This was an unusual community. We did a little analysis. I have a team that does data analytics, and we did a little analysis on this. What is interesting about this was that there is no dominant group in that tower. In most communities, there's a sort of dominant community, and if you're the local authority or the police, you can go and talk to the imam, or you can talk to the priest, or you can talk to the local councillor. I think something interesting and worrying is true about Grenfell. They complained, I think with some justification, they didn't have a voice,
Yes.
And I think that is partly because this place felt like, if you like, I don't use this term pejoratively, a Tower of Babel, which nobody quite knew who to talk to, and people didn't know each other. And I think that's an important element here.
And just to say, that's obviously your research, so that we just put that out there. You live very close.
I live a few hundred yards from Grenfell. I was there when the tower went up. I've taken my kids to play dates in Grenfell Tower, and I go to the local sports centre and the local shops with people who lived in Grenfell
What's
Tower.
the key issue out of the whole?
I saw that morning hundreds of firefighters risk their own lives to try and save people in Grenfell Tower. Danny Cotton said that the people who sent the firefighters in said, you are risking your life. You might lose your life if you save these people who are trapped in the tower. They went in. I don't think we can criticise the firefighters who worked throughout the night in Grenfell Tower, putting their own lives at risk in this instance. I don't think racism was anything to do with the institutional response or the emergency service response to that tragedy. And I'd like to set that on record. There were white people in the tower, and actually the Grenfell Towers organisation was actually run by a white man called Edward Daffon, who I've met.
I don't think anybody's going to argue with that, Rachel, but all I will say is dealing with, let's say, a tower where everybody speaks English, if you are a public service, is not the same as dealing with where there are 20, 30 languages being spoken in an emergency. And I think we just need to think about that.
Let someone speak now. Well, Michelle Dewberry.
I've got 2 points to make. My first one is, whatever happens going forward, we must make sure that lessons are learned from what happened at Grenfell, and that these people, it was such a tragedy, and we need to make sure that they did not die in vain. And one of my concerns is, when you swap political governments, things just get lost and get dropped. And we need to make sure that whatever recommendations have come out of this report, they are implemented and followed through so that this can never, ever happen again. That's my first point. My second point is, and I'm not someone who gets outraged for outrage's sake, but I am absolutely disgusted by the comments that were made by someone that I previously respected very much, to even suggest by Baroness Lawrence that if these people were white, they would have been rescued. I find that so offensive. And when you say she apologised, when you say she apologised, I need to be clear, she apologised for the upset caused, not for the remarks, not for the suggestions. It is true.
Can we then hear from Doreen Lawrence? I've met at London Fire and at London Fire Brigade Union. I'm reassured race played no part in their response to the Grenfell Tower fire. Learning about the conditions firefighters faced that night has been insightful. Apologies for any upset caused. I'm confident how valued equality is to LFB and to FBU.
Baroness Lawrence is not my greatest fan, I can tell you that. But I have to say, people make mistakes, and given what she has been through,
indeed,
it's not an unforgivable error.
This is a distraction, in my opinion.
Now, let's move on, because you want the second part. You started on the second part, which is like the building regulations.
Yes.
And let's get on to that.
This is a distraction from the bigger issues. Yeah. And, you know, I think by raising race and class, people are getting distracted. What I'm saying is there is a structural problem with the way we look after low-income people and people in social housing. So this is not a party political issue. Successive governments have failed people in public housing. There are chronic shortages, and there were bad decisions that were made. And I have to say, Trevor, I really disagree with you, and I think that Tower of Babel comment is pejorative. This is actually a group that was organised, that made submissions about the aluminium composite material. They did. They were organised. They made representations.
There was a campaign group within the tower.
No, there was a residents' association. They had the wherewithal to select cladding material themselves, which was not used, which maybe would have saved their lives.
But you're talking about something quite different. This report was, how do you get, in the midst of an absolute chaotic situation, hundreds of people out of a particular situation? If you've ever been near anything like that, you will know, for example, the need for instant communication, the capability to say to people, do this, and they do that, is absolutely central. The only point I'm making here is that this wasn't your average vanilla setting where everybody has the same culture, same background.
Really
and
choosing your neutral language here.
Look, I mean, OK, this is what... all I can tell you, this is what you have to deal. This is what you have to deal with in operations. You can't just assume that this is like every other situation. That's a simple point I was making to Nick. It's not about the colour of skin. but in a situation where there are people who don't speak English, who might not understand
It wasn't about the fact they
that.
didn't speak English, that's why they died. They were in a 22 block where the ladders could
Well, you
only
don't
reach
know
the
that,
13th
Rachel.
floor, that was surrounded with cladding that was actually a source of fuel for the fire.
The question
with
was,
one
the question
exit.
was, did they get them out in time?
No.
And that's not just a matter of what was on the cladding. It was a matter of how you organised it.
Moving on
Yeah.
to the bigger issues, which I think are very fundamental issues.